In the underbelly of America's highways, a chilling mystery unfolds: the Redhead Murders. A haunting saga that spans almost a decade and a half, from the late 70s to the early 90s. The Redhead Murders are a series of unsolved homicides that sent shivers down the spine of the United States. The victims, all women, all redheads. Their tragic stories, intertwined by the cruel hand of fate, lead us down a path of unsolved mysteries and cold cases. These women, often seen hitchhiking or suspected of being involved in prostitution, were found discarded along highways in multiple states. Their lives brutally cut short, their stories silenced before they could ever reach their climax. The eerie similarity in their hair color and their tragic ends sparked the chilling nomenclature: the Redhead Murders. But how many were there? 5? 14? The uncertainty only adds to the chilling enigma. The exact number of victims remains a mystery, a grim reminder of the many lives that may have been snuffed out unaccounted, their tales untold, their justice unserved. Some victims, however, have been identified. Among them are Tina Marie McKenney Farmer and Michelle Lavone Inman, two names that stand out in the sea of faceless victims. Yet the identification of these victims has only deepened the mystery, with their assailants remaining shrouded in the shadows of anonymity. This is the haunting tale of the Redhead Murders, a mystery that has puzzled investigators for decades. A chilling narrative that remains unsolved, echoing down the corridors of time, whispering tales of horror, injustice, and the desperate search for truth. The victims, each with their own stories, were united by a haunting similarity: their red hair. Imagine, if you will, a time between the late 70s and early 90s, a period when these women with fiery locks were targeted due to their vibrant hair color. A terrifying thought indeed. Women like Tina Marie McKenney Farmer and Michelle Lavone Inman were among the unfortunate victims caught up in this chilling series of crimes. Tina Marie, a woman whose life was cut short in this dreadful saga. Hers is a tale marked by an abrupt end, her last moments spent on the side of a highway. Similarly, Michelle Lavone Inman, another red-haired victim, found her tragic fate along the roadways of America. Their lives, their stories were abruptly halted by an unseen menace, a phantom predator lurking in the shadows of our nation's highways. But the list of victims doesn't end there. There's Tracy Sue Walker, a name that might not ring a bell, and that's because her identity remained shrouded in mystery for decades. Only in the year 2022 did we finally put a name to her. A woman who had been lost in time, her identity wiped away until the advent of advanced technology allowed us to finally unmask her. Yet behind each of these names lies a tale of a life taken too soon. Tales that are as heartbreaking as they are horrifying. Women, often hitchhikers or involved in situations that made them vulnerable, left to be found along the cold, impersonal stretch of highways spanning across multiple states. And it's not just about those we know. The chilling fact remains that there are still victims out there, unidentified. Women who were not only robbed of their lives, but also of their identities, their stories left untold. Despite their identification, the question remains: who committed these heinous crimes? Enter Jerry Leon Johns, a man whose DNA was linked to one of the victims. This truck driver with a seemingly ordinary life was thrust into the spotlight of a chilling crime spree spanning over a decade. Jerry Leon Johns, an unassuming man, was suddenly under scrutiny when his DNA was found to match that of one of the victims of the Redhead Murders, Tina Marie McKenney Farmer. What followed was a remarkable effort by a group of high school students in Tennessee. Tasked by their sociology teacher to delve into this cold case, these youngsters, with the tenacity of seasoned investigators, started drawing lines connecting Johns to the heinous crimes. Johns, a truck driver by profession, had an eerie consistency with the murderer's modus operandi. The victims were often found along highways, a place frequented by truck drivers. The students' research suggested a potential link between Johns and the series of unsolved murders. The similarities in the cases were too striking to ignore, and Johns' profile fit like a glove. Their findings were so compelling that they were presented to law enforcement experts. The experts found the suspect's profile consistent with the other killings. Johns, who was living under the radar, suddenly became the prime suspect in these unsolved murders. But here's the kicker. Despite the DNA evidence and the striking similarities in the cases, no charges have been filed against Johns. With the evidence at hand, one would think that the case would be closed. But the reality of the situation is far from it. The Redhead murders, even with a prime suspect, still have many layers left to unravel. Various victims remain unidentified, and the case, as haunting as ever, remains a mystery. The question that lingers in the air is akin to a chilling breeze, sending shivers down our spines. But with Johns as a suspect, why do the murders remain unsolved? Despite promising leads, the Redhead murders remain a cold case. Even with the passage of time, the tireless efforts of law enforcement and the public to solve these murders continue unabated. In this puzzling web of unsolved crimes, the name Jerry Leon Johns often comes up. He's been linked to the murder of Tina Marie McKenney Farmer through DNA evidence and identified by high school students in Tennessee as a potential suspect. However, it's important to note that while Johns is a suspect, no charges have been filed against him. The wheels of justice grind slowly, and in this case, they seem to be moving at a glacial pace. But it's not just about identifying the perpetrator. It's also about honoring the victims. Sadly, many of the victims of the Redhead murders still remain unidentified. Their stories are waiting to be told, their names waiting to be spoken. They were more than just redheads found along highways. They were daughters, sisters, mothers. Their anonymity is a stark reminder of the work still to be done, the questions still unanswered. The Redhead murders have sparked a certain fascination among true crime enthusiasts. The case has been taken on by high school students who've not only studied the case, but also contributed to the ongoing investigation. They've brought fresh perspectives and renewed energy to a case that has baffled experienced detectives for decades. Through their tireless efforts, and with the aid of modern forensic techniques, these students have managed to link Johns to multiple murders. They presented their findings to law enforcement experts, who found the suspect's profile consistent with the other killings. Yet, despite these promising leads, the investigation continues. The Redhead murders have become a haunting mystery, a disturbing puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit together. But the determination to solve this case and bring justice to the victims remains as strong as ever. The Redhead murders, a chilling mystery that continues to baffle and intrigue. We wait in anticipation for the day when this enigma will finally be solved, when justice will be served, and when the victims will finally be at peace. Decades later, the Redhead murders still haunt the nation's consciousness. This enduring mystery began with a series of grim discoveries. Bodies of red-headed females found along highways in the United States between 1978 and 1992. The victims, often hitchhikers or those involved in prostitution, were believed to be the prey of an unidentified male serial killer. The total number of victims is estimated to be between 5 and 14, marking a chilling span of potential violence. Over the years, the tireless efforts of investigators have led to the identification of some victims, including Tina Marie McKenney Farmer and Michelle Lavone Inman. The persistence of a high school sociology class in Tennessee has even uncovered a potential link to a prime suspect, Jerry Leon Johns, a truck driver whose DNA was found at one of the crime scenes. Yet, despite these advances, no charges have been filed against him, and many of the victims remain unidentified. The ongoing investigation into the Redhead murders is a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice. High school students, teachers, and professional investigators alike continue to comb through evidence, hoping to unearth clues that will finally bring closure to this decades-old case. They're driven by the hope that one day the remaining victims will be identified and the person or people responsible will be brought to justice. But as the years roll on, the mystery of the Redhead murders deepens, casting a long and unsettling shadow across the nation. The case serves as a chilling reminder of the unsolved crimes that lurk in the underbelly of our society, waiting to be solved. Despite the darkness that surrounds it, the investigation persists, fueled by the unyielding desire for truth and justice. As the mystery endures, so does the search for answers. This is the unresolved saga of the Redhead murders.
Ever pondered the clandestine tales a gravel pit may contain? In the context of the Hausjärvi Gravel Pit located in Finland, it's a succession of unresolved homicides, not the ideal location for leisurely activities, right? Amidst the serene, crisp atmosphere of Finland, a sinister narrative unravels. During the 90s, the Hausjärvi Gravel Pit transformed into a grotesque theater for a string of unresolved violent incidents. The unfortunate victims, Helena Marilainen, Tuula Lukarinen, the enigmatically disappeared Marit Hanti. A disturbing pattern began to surface, indicating a probable serial silently creeping within the darkness. Tagged as the Järvenpää serial killer, this phantom offender has instilled a legacy of dread and ambiguity. Picture this: you're a woman, accepting a lift from a mysterious, dark-haired individual. You engage in casual conversation, perhaps indulge in a few beverages or even partake in some unidentifiable substances. Then the unimaginable occurs. You're brutally assaulted, your final moments engulfed by the icy, harsh boundaries of a gravel pit. An episode fitting for a thriller film, correct? However, for these unfortunate women, it was a horrifying reality. The Finnish National Bureau of Investigation posits that this same dark-haired man is culpable for all 3 incidents, and potentially even more attempted homicides. The probe remains ongoing, with fresh leads and evidence gradually being uncovered over the years. Alarmingly, more incidents bearing uncanny resemblances have come to light, indicating a potential link to the same perpetrator. But let's not allow this grim narrative to overshadow our jovial spirit. After all, it's common to hear about a gravel pit serving as a crime scene. Now that's utilitarian property at its finest. Therefore, the next time A offers you a ride, perhaps contemplate utilizing public transport. It might be a tad, but at least it significantly diminishes your chances of ending up in a gravel pit. So, who's the primary suspect? Often it's a mysterious figure with raven locks, isn't it? Now let's delve into the enigma of this elusive character. Our prime suspect, known as the Järvenpää serial slayer, was identified to have sable hair, an ambiguous detail that gives us a chillingly vague physical description. It's as unsettlingly generic as saying, beware of that man with a pair of eyes and a nose. Yet what made this man distinctive was not his hair color, but his disconcerting method of operation. He had an uncanny ability to lure unsuspecting women by offering them rides, a seemingly benign act that morphed into a terrifying ordeal. It's sufficient to give one pause before accepting any kind gesture from strangers, particularly those with hair, right? And it wasn't just transportation he provided. Once inside his vehicle, his victims became guinea pigs for his vile experiment, a blend of alcohol and unidentifiable substances. This isn't about a jovial round of drinks. It was a malevolent ploy to weaken his victims, rendering them defenseless to his violent designs. The brutality these women faced was terrifying. They weren't merely casualties of a random act of violence. They were prey, pursued by a predator who employed deception and manipulation as his arsenal. It's a bone-chilling thought that such a man might be hidden in the darkness, ready to pounce at any moment. But let's inject a bit of levity into the scenario. After all, not every dusky-haired stranger is a potential serial murderer. Some could be socially inept individuals who, instead of offering you transportation, might present you with an earnest yet creepy magic trick. So when you cross paths with a dusky-haired stranger, maintain your calm. Just ensure they're not wielding a suspicious cocktail or have a magic trick concealed up their sleeve. And keep in mind, not all dark-haired strangers are lethal. Some of them are simply eerie. Now, the detectives at the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation aren't merely warming their seats, they're actively pursuing the case. Indeed, this isn't simply an ignored dossier gathering dust in a forgotten cabinet. The Hausjärvi Gravel Pit Murders are anything but neglected. The dedicated squad at the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation has been relentlessly committed, hunting down leads and assembling the macabre jigsaw that is the handiwork of the Järvenpää serial killer. Over the decades, the case has experienced a consistent influx of fresh leads and evidence. Some of these potential clues have led to cul-de-sacs, but others have unveiled captivating new paths for examination. The Bureau has been meticulously examining these, akin to miners sifting for precious minerals. But instead of unearthing gold, they're fervently seeking that one essential piece of information. The vital component of the puzzle will crack the case wide open. And they're not merely focusing on the 3 identified victims. The Bureau firmly believes that this brunette specter may have preyed upon others. There are supplementary cases with matching modus operandi that hint at a potential link to the same culprit. These incidents revolve around women being offered transportation, consuming alcohol and unidentified substances, and subsequently becoming victims of violence. The investigation persists fervently, with the Bureau leaving no aspect unexplored in their pursuit for justice. They're not solely chasing a murderer, they're on the trail of a serial killer. And in this somber game of cat and mouse, every lead, every hint, and every piece of evidence could be the golden key to apprehending this menace. So, If you're in Finland and possess valuable information, don't hesitate to reach out. Your assistance could be indispensable. And perhaps, just perhaps, you might aid in resolving a murder or three. These offenses are not merely enigmatic. They've embedded a profound impact on the pervasive dread, intertwines itself with the very essence of Finnish society, a frosty echo of the Hausjärvi Gravel Pit homicides. This apprehension is certainly justified. It's the aftermath of a sequence of unresolved, brutal offenses, identified substances, the subsequent acts of violence. The patterns are disturbingly recognizable, pointing towards a possible link to the same culprit. This cascading wave of fear and ambiguity, this persistent influence, has revolutionized the Finnish perception of safety. It's a stark testament to the capacity that unresolved offenses possess over society, the indelible mark they imprint. So always be alert, folks. And if you encounter a dark-haired stranger at a gravel pit, well, you've been forewarned. So what have we gleaned today? We've unraveled the haunting narrative of the Hausjärvi Gravel Pit Murders, a chronicle of unresolved brutal offenses that have etched a permanent scar on the nation near Helsinki, Finland. We've delved into the lives of the unfortunate victims, Helena Marilainen, Tuula Lukarinen, and the enigmatically disappeared Marit Hanti, and their uncanny encounters with a sinister, ebony-haired stranger. We've journeyed through the relentless endeavors of the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation in their unyielding quest to unfurl the enigma shrouding these appalling atrocities. The Bureau suspects that these crimes, along with other attempts at murder, spring from the same sinister source, the Järvenpää serial killer. We've also witnessed the profound impact these crimes have had on the national psyche, instilling a pervading sense of dread and apprehension that remains palpable to this day. Despite the years rolling by, the investigation continues unabated, with fresh leads and evidences continually emerging, offering a beacon of hope that justice may yet prevail. We've laid bare the grim reality that these women were lured with rides, intoxicated with alcohol and unidentified substances, and subjected to ruthless acts of violence. A stark warning of the caution we must adopt in our daily lives, and the significance of remaining alert to safeguard our well-being and that of those surrounding us. This narrative is a tribute to the tenacity of the human spirit, the unyielding quest for truth, and the enduring aspiration for justice. Despite the horrifying circumstances, these victims and their stories endure, serving as a harsh reminder of the malevolent underbelly of our world. However, let's take a moment to inject some levity. After all, when grappling with such macabre subjects, a sprinkle of wit can act as a soothing balm to the tension. Remember, it's fine to chuckle in the face of terror, to uncover mirth in the most somber corners, and to beam in the face of hardship. And remember, folks, when life tosses you gravel pits, well, simply steer clear. Truly, it's not a risk worth taking. In the frostbitten heart of Russia, an unresolved enigma continues to plague the city of Cherepovets. Visualize this: the era spanning from 2004 to 2007, a chilling epic characterized by a harrowing series of unresolved homicides. The anonymous phantom behind these atrocities? A nameless serial murderer branded solely as the Danilovsky Maniac. This spectral figure remains an inscrutable mystery, implicated in the slaying of no less than 7 individuals, a macabre count that induces a bone-rattling chill. Who was this Danilovsky Maniac? A male, it is believed, within the age bracket of 30 and 40, of a muscular build with a height near 5 feet 9 inches. His characteristics, a thinning hairline, obscured eyes, and conceivably even bald patches, merge into the multitude of visages. The maniac's infamous appellation originates from his preferred hunting terrain, a derelict construction area on Danilovsky Street. A site that once hummed with vitality now resonates with the mute cries of his victims. What distinguishes the Danilovsky Maniac, however, is his peculiar identifying mark. Crude erotic sketches, a warped symbol left at the location of his malevolent deeds, a horrific trail of clues that, to this point, has led investigators on fruitless chase. The dossiers on the maniac are comprehensive, embracing 18 volumes and over 200 interrogations. The municipal office even announced a bounty, yet regardless of these endeavors, the identity of the Danilovsky Maniac persists in obscurity. Speculations propose he may be deceased or detained for unrelated offenses, yet in the absence of concrete evidence, these remain mere assumptions. This unresolved enigma carries a frightful fascination, a horrifying narrative that, even in 2024, lingers unresolved. As the glacial winds moan through the desolate streets, the inhabitants of Cherepovets can't escape the nagging query: where resides the Danilovsky Maniac now? The chronicle of the Danilovsky Maniac is a spine-chilling saga of dread and demise. Our narrative commences in 2004, in the tranquil town of Cherepovets, Russia, where the inaugural victim was discovered, signaling the onset of a gruesome series of slayings that would persist until 2007. The victims, primarily females and young girls, were frequently kidnapped in the glaring daylight, a petrifying act that instilled waves of terror throughout the town. Visualize the audacity of the murderer, stalking the streets in broad daylight, selecting his prey without trepidation of getting apprehended. This outright contempt for safety and law was a significant element of the horror that the Danilovsky Maniac imposed on the community. As the homicides endured, a pattern started to materialize. The victims bore similar physical traits. Most markedly, 6 of them were blondes. The murderer had a particular preference, a detail that exacerbated the escalating apprehension. Any blonde woman couldn't help but contemplate if she might be his next target. But the horror didn't cease there. In a sinister turn of events, the killer abandoned an eerie memento at each crime scene. Vulgar, pornographic illustrations. These malevolent sketches served as a bone-chilling signature, a stamp of the maniac, a grim token of the warped psyche behind the massacres. The years advanced and the death toll escalated. From 2004 to 2007, the town of Cherepovets was ensnared in the frosty clutches of the Danilovsky Maniac. The populace watched, waited, and fretted as the authorities appeared impotent to thwart the ceaseless reign of dread. But then, as unexpectedly as they had commenced, the murders ceased. In 2007, the ultimate victim was unearthed, and then silence. The frosty saga of the Danilovsky Maniac had reached a sudden and unfathomable conclusion. By 2007, the rule of the Danilovsky Maniac seemed to reach an abrupt cessation, but why? Was he apprehended for a different offense? Did he relocate to a fresh place? Or did he merely choose to desist? That's a question that continues to plague the minds of those who recall the reign of the Danilovsky Maniac, a hair-raising episode in the archives of true crime. The pursuit of the Danilovsky Maniac was extensive and exhaustive, and yet it yielded no results. The probe into the case was a gargantuan undertaking encompassing 18 volumes of proof, with more than 200 interrogations carried out in 2008 alone. The mayor's office even offered a substantial bounty in a bid to draw critical details about the elusive murderer. Nevertheless, the identity of the maniac remained cloaked in enigma, his sinister secrets shielded within his psyche. As time marched on, hypotheses about the killer's identity began to crystallize. Some postulated that the maniac might have passed away, his reign of terror curtailed not by law enforcement, but by the unyielding grip of mortality. Others inferred that he might be incarcerated, but for unrelated crimes, his murderous history unnoticed in a deluge of other transgressions. A particularly captivating conjecture centered around another infamous personality, serial murderer Maxim Krenov. Whispers circulated, associating Krenov with the Danilovsky Maniac case. However, these whispers were never corroborated. Krenov was condemned to life imprisonment for other homicides, with no indisputable proof linking him to the atrocities committed on Danilovsky Street. Yet another hypothesis painted the maniac as a man of approximately 5 feet 9 inches, with a robust build, thinning hairline, and murky eyes, aged between 58 and 73 years old. The police even initiated the collection of DNA samples from older male inhabitants matching this depiction, with hopes of finding a correlation. But all these endeavors proved futile. The terrifying truth persisted. The maniac was still on the loose, or at the very least unidentified. The vulgar, pornographic illustrations left at the crime scenes stood as chilling mementos of the maniac's deranged psyche, a perverse signature left in thee of his horrific deeds. Despite the tireless chase, the Danilovsky Maniac remained an apparition, eluding the grasp of justice. His identity, his location, his motivations, all remained cryptic components of a puzzle that continued to perplex detectives and true crime aficionados alike. Decades have elapsed since the final heinous act credited to the infamous Danilovsky Maniac, yet the enigma endures. Atrocities committed by this nameless terror of Cherepovets persist in casting an extensive, eerie specter upon the populace. Leaving a path of victims in his aftermath, an entire metropolis was ensnared in the grip of dread. Presently, even as the reverberation of his reign of terror have diminished into the archives of history, the puzzle of his identity persists in baffling and ensnaring global attention. The community, though wounded, displays an unwavering resilience. The absence of resolution, nonetheless, has left an enduring impact. The victims, their kin, along with the inhabitants of Cherepovets, remain in a state of ongoing uncertainty, longing for revelations that are yet to emerge. The phantom of the Danilovsky Maniac continues to hover, an eerie commemoration of the unspeakable atrocities that once gripped the city. Outside the confines of Cherepovets, the case has captivated the curiosity of true crime aficionados across the globe. The maniac's unique method of operation, his elusive persona, and the unresolved nature of his crimes contribute to a morbidly intriguing narrative. It's a conundrum that insists on beckoning, a mystery awaiting resolution. Concurrently, the quest for justice remains unyielding. In an effort to reveal the perpetrator, DNA evidence is being gathered from older male inhabitants who correspond to the suspect profile. It's a battle against the clock, a fervent endeavor to conclude a chapter that has been unresolved for an extended period. Yet, despite the steadfast efforts, the identity of the Danilovsky Maniac persists as elusive as ever. Conjectures are plentiful, rumors are widespread, but the truth continues to be cloaked in uncertainty. As we venture deeper into the bone-chilling narrative of the Danilovsky Maniac, we find ourselves faced with more conundrums than clarifications. The mystery withstands, eternally imprinted in the chronicles of true crime. The Danilovsky Maniac, a designation that provokes a bone-chilling terror, continues to be an enigmatic puzzle cloaked and nestled in the bosom of Russia. During the harrowing span of 2004 to 2007, an unspeakable horror was unleashed. 7 female victims were abducted in broad daylight, their existence abruptly and savagely terminated on a forsaken construction terrain. The maniac's unique imprint? Vulgar pornographic illustrations left at the crime scene, a ghastly autograph of a malevolent creator. The investigative effort was wide-ranging, encompassing 200 interrogations, bolstered by a substantial monetary incentive from the mayor's office. Yet in spite of these exhaustive endeavors, the assassin's identity remains veiled. Today, genetic samples are being procured from senior male dwellers, a frantic attempt to reveal this elusive beast. However, for now, the case stands unresolved, the identity of the Danilovsky Maniac obscured in obscurity. As we depart from the ice-cloaked avenues of Cherepovets, the specter of the Danilovsky Maniac looms, a freezing reminder of the unresolved enigmas that haunt the secluded recesses of our world. Visualize an urban landscape paralyzed by dread, a relentless killer on the prowl, and a sequence of baffling enigmas that still perplex us in the present day. Step into the late 1880s in London, an era when the metropolis found itself overshadowed by a chain of horrific homicides, now referred to as the Thames Torso Murders. 4 principal atrocities, numerous restless nights, and a perpetrator who seemingly evaporated into the ether. The casualties, exclusively women, endured not simple deaths, but were meticulously disassembled, albeit not with surgical finesse. The avenues hummed with hushed conjectures and assumptions. A bold few even dared to associate these slaughters with the notorious Jack the Ripper. Nonetheless, the distinct methods of operation suggested a different criminal. The identity of this executioner remained an enigma, bestowing upon him the fearsome moniker of the Torso Slayer. As we plunge into the core of these gruesome violations, bear in mind, this is a narrative where fabrication strains to rival the bone-chilling actuality. In the waning years of the 19th century, London was thrown into turmoil by 2 grisly, the notorious Redhead and Whitehall murders, sent a shiver through the hearts of the metropolis's populace. 2 females, each savagely mutilated, their identities cloaked in these macabre incidents, transpired in an era riddled with spine-chilling criminal narratives. Yet the Redhead and Whitehall enigmas distinguished themselves with their particularly eerie nature. In the Redhead predicament, a female's torso was retrieved, swathed in packaging, drifting down the River Thames. The uncovering was as bewildering as it was appalling. The body was mutilated with a degree of proficiency that hinted the culprit was far from a novice. But the exactness wasn't surgical, leading sleuths down a labyrinth of conflicting hypotheses. Despite relentless pursuit, the identity of the Redhead casualty remains an unsolved puzzle even today. The Whitehall conundrum was no less distressing. A female's torso was unearthed in the cellar of the embryonic Metropolitan Police headquarters. The ultimate irony. A theater of crime right beneath the watchful eyes of London's law enforcers. The corpse was mutilated in a manner akin to the Rainham incident, leading some to conjecture that the same malefactor was at play. Yet, mirroring the Rainham incident, the Whitehall casualty's identity and her murderer continue to elude discovery. The lack of breakthroughs in both cases was as baffling as the transgressions themselves. Despite exhaustive inquiries involving eminent figures like Chief Inspector Swanson and Commissioner Monroe, no substantial headway was achieved. The cases whipped up a tempest of conjecture, dread, and fascination. Some even ventured to connect these murders to the infamous Jack the Ripper, but the disparities in the modus operandi hinted otherwise. As city's terror amplified, so did the enigma. Who was capable of such heinous deeds? The Rainham and Whitehall enigmas serve as a somber reminder of a period when London was in the grip of terror and uncertainty, the echoes of which continue to reverberate in the chronicles of true crime history. From the haze of ambiguity, a moniker emerged: Elizabeth Jackson. In the macabre tale of the Thames Torso Murders, Elizabeth Jackson represented a pivotal juncture. Unlike preceding victims, Elizabeth was not an unnamed casualty. She was a tangible entity, a woman of substance and identity. Elizabeth Jackson was courtesan hailing from Chelsea. Her fragmented corpse was unearthed not at a singular location, but scattered across multiple spots by the Thames. The initial fragment was discovered in the early days of June 2088, and in the ensuing fortnight, more portions were recovered from the river. The ghastly discovery sent shockwaves of revulsion coursing through the city, freezing the souls of even the most stoic Londoners. The scattered jigsaw pieces began to align when a physician confirmed the remains belonged to an expectant woman. Subsequently, a critical clue emerged, a missive from a woman named Elizabeth Jackson, who was with child and had vanished since late May. The pieces coalesced, confirming the identity of the deceased. What distinguished Elizabeth's from the earlier victims was the severity of her mutilation. The perpetrator had not merely dismembered her body, he had disemboweled it. This degree of savagery marked a terrifying evolution in the killer's method. The recognition of Elizabeth Jackson manifested as a significant milestone in the investigation. It was a faint beacon of optimism amidst the oppressive gloom, offering a potential lead in the pursuit of the elusive torso killer. However, the murderer remained an enigma, his persona as opaque as the Thames itself. The recovery of Elizabeth Jackson's remains signaled a noteworthy chapter in the Thames Torso Murders narrative. The monstrous deeds now had a face, a genuine victim, which amplified the public's outcry for retribution. The law enforcement agencies were grappling under relentless pressure to reveal the offender, to terminate the reign of terror. With one casualty identified, will the torso killer's true identity be next? Just when the metropolis believed the nightmare had ended, the torso slayer emerged once more. This time, the dread sank its claws into Pynchon Street, a locale that would soon be forever linked with the torso slayer's bloody exploits. On a seemingly mundane September dawn in 1889, the horrifying unearthing of a female's torso beneath a railway arch rocked the metropolis to its very foundation. A ghastly echo of earlier murders, the casualty was dismembered with a technique that fell short of surgical finesse, a distinct signature of the enigmatic torso slayer. The identity of the woman was never unraveled, her narrative permanently muted, leaving behind only a bone-chilling enigma. Pynchon Street torso murder ignited a whirlwind of conjecture. Was this the handiwork of the notorious Jack the Ripper, or was there another beast lurking in the misty alleys of Victorian London? The variations in the modus operandi, nonetheless, indicated a different perpetrator. Jack the Ripper was infamous for his savage yet public onslaughts, whereas the torso slayer dispatched his victims in a dismembered state and concealed them, an unmistakable divergence in their ominous symphony of terror. The inquiry into this hair-raising homicide was spearheaded by the formidable Chief Inspector Swanson. Despite his relentless exertion, the leads went cold. There was as fleeting as the murderer himself, and the case, like its predecessors, remained veiled in ambiguity and apprehension. The city's apprehension was tangible, the reverberations of the torso slayer's deeds pulsing in the hearts of its inhabitants. In the end, the Pynchon Street torso murder turned into another intimidating episode in the notorious Thames Torso Murders, a savage testament to the reign of terror wrought by the torso slayer. The solutions the metropolis desperately yearned for continued to elude, the identity of the murderer and his victims eternally swallowed in the pages of history. The terminal act of the torso slayer was as spine-chilling as his initial one. The city held its breath, yearning for revelations that never materialized. With the relentless march of time, the gruesome saga of the Thames Torso Murders receded into the obscure pages of criminal annals, behind nothing but a miasma of unanswered queries. The probing into these macabre acts of violence were as intricate as the puzzles themselves. Eminent personalities like Chief Inspector Swanson and Commissioner Monroe found themselves entangled in the intricate web of investigations, their discord resulting in Monroe's displacement. Yet in spite of their earnest endeavors, the mysteries largely remain enigmatic, the victims predominantly nameless. Only Elizabeth Jackson's identity managed to rise from the abyss of this sinister enigma. And what of the conjectures, the murmurs in the clandestine corners of Victorian London? A section hypothesized that these killings were the deeds of the infamous Jack the Ripper. However, variances in the modus operandi pointed in a divergent direction. The executor of the Thames Torso Murders demonstrated a degree of expertise, but lacked the surgeon's precision. The victims were fragmented, their remains disposed like discarded echoes of the past. This was act of an alternate breed of beast, labeled as the torso killer. Yet, the most eerie element of these heinous acts is perhaps their enduring impact. Subsequent incidents like the Battersea Mystery have been linked to the Thames Torso Murders, indicating a terror that transcended the confines of the initial probes. These slaughters cast an extensive, ominous shadow over the chronicle of crime, a shadow that stubbornly, even in the present day. As we probe the enigmas of the bygone era, we are constantly confronted with our own constraints. We can collate evidence, scrutinize it, even build hypotheses. But the ultimate truth, the final resolution, often eludes our grasp. The Thames Torso Murders stand as a grim testament to this reality. The Thames Torso Murders serve as a solemn reminder that often the true horrors reside in the forgotten crevices of history, their secrets guarded by the mute procession of time.
Envision a metropolis renowned for its art, heritage and antiquity, abruptly morphing into a disturbing tableau resembling a horror film. Florence, an urban haven rich in cultural and historical significance, where the Renaissance made its initial debut, where the influential Medici family once presided, was converted into a nightmarish hunting ground for an unidentified menace. The Monster of Florence, as this ominous presence was later christened, cast an ominous pall over this city, morphing its idyllic suburbs into a spine-chilling tableau of crime. Amidst the years 1974 and 1985, the metropolis succumbed to an inexplicable wave of fear that defied comprehension. 14 existences were mercilessly extinguished, aspirations and hopes obliterated under the Tuscan lunar glow. The victims, largely young duos seeking solitude in the city's forested fringes, were hunted during the new moons, their existences prematurely terminated by a .22 caliber Beretta firearm and a blade. The city of Florence, once a radiant beacon of enlightenment, descended into a vortex of dread and unpredictability. The cobblestone pathways, typically teeming with vitality, grew silent as denizens rushed home before dusk. The city's energetic nightlife dimmed, its melodies, its mirth suppressed. The monster's reign of terror induced a bone-chilling transformation in the city's ambience, a stark juxtaposition to the warmth and vibrancy it was celebrated for. The Monster of Florence, a moniker attributed by journalist Mario Spezzi, ingrained itself in the city's dark folklore. The case, marked by its ritualistic mutilation of the female victims' corpses and the mocking letters dispatched to the authorities, stumped criminologists and detectives globally. The scenic suburbs of Florence, once emblematic of Italian allure and sophistication, became interchangeable with the monster's horrific. Consequently, the splendid city of Florence was ensnared by an invisible terror, the Monster of Florence. A horrifying path of gore was the haunting evidence of the terror that had taken place on the outskirts of the city. Hidden within the amorous and picturesque metropolis of Florence, a horrifying narrative unfolding. Young lovers, naively oblivious to the imminent jeopardy, became the targeted quarry of a brutal beast, a fiend who hunted them under the obscurity of new moons. This fiend had a peculiar pattern of operation that was as terrifying as it was unvarying. The weapon of preference? A .22 caliber Beretta firearm, a lethal device that discharged Winchester Series H projectiles with deadly accuracy. But a firearm was not the only weapon in the beast's armory. A blade, icy and relentless, was also utilized with an unnerving level of skill. The casualties were not simply murdered, they were mutilated in a way that indicated a grotesque ritualistic aspect to these atrocious offenses. The female casualties endured the core of this sadistic exhibition, their bodies marred in a way that induced a shiver in even the most experienced detectives. The degree of savagery was such that it was beyond comprehension, introducing a terrifying new interpretation, the term monster. The path of gore left by the beast depicted a horrifying image of uncontrolled fear. Each crime scene was a display of terror, a grim reminder of the horrifying deeds that had transpired. The casualties were not merely victims, they were participants in a ghoulish show, their existence terminated in the most terrifying way conceivable. The Monster of Florence, was not just a murderer. He was a constructor of terror, a manipulator who devised a melody of fear that echoed through the outskirts of the city and further. His offences were not just violent acts, they were a distorted form of art, a horrifying demonstration of dominance and control that left a path of gore and a city in distress. The monster didn't simply annihilate. He left behind a horrifying spectacle, a signature of his abhorrent actions. The path of gore was not just evidence of his offences, it was a chilling reminder of the beast that hid in the darkness of Florence, a phantom that left the city struggling with a terror that seemed too abhorrent to be genuine. With each victim claimed, the task force initiated their pursuit of the beast. The once tranquil suburbs of Florence were now far from a serene Italian haven. They had morphed into the stalking grounds for an untiring predator. Confronted with a formidable challenge, the authorities grappled with the reality of a serial slayer on the loose, void of any substantial evidence to guide them. Soon to earn the moniker, the Beast of Florence demonstrated a specific modus operandi. He preyed upon young, unsuspecting couples in remote locations, leaving a gruesome trail of 14 victims from 1974-1985. The savagery of the crimes was bone-chilling, with female victims often subjected to ritualistic mutilation. The law enforcement was consistently left confounded. The beast's elusive character, coupled with the scarcity of meaningful evidence, transformed the investigation into a maze of misdirection and fruitless leads. An array of suspects was scrutinized, yet none seemed to align with the profiles succinctly. The murderer was an enigma, perpetually a step ahead, leaving the detectives groping in obscurity. The investigation veered when a prior crime from 1968 resurfaced, entangling a woman, her lover, and her spouse. While the weapon of murder remained undiscovered, the nature of the crime echoed chillingly with the beast's atrocities. Could this be the breakthrough that the detectives were desperately seeking, or was it merely another fragment of the ever-complicating puzzle? Law enforcement faced an escalating challenge. The urgency to solve the case was intensifying, yet the beast seemed to dissipate after each act of bloodshed. The detectives were in pursuit of a phantom, an ominous entity overshadowing the city of Florence. The Beast of Florence's case transcended the mere resolution of a series of horrifying murders. It was about reinstating tranquility to a city imprisoned by dread. But as the victims increased, so did the enigma. Who was the Beast of Florence? Why did he, and most crucially, would he ever be apprehended? In pursuit of the beast was akin to hunting a phantom that seemed to dissipate into nothingness. The of Florence anxiously awaited answers, and the detectives were resolute to uncover them. The chase for the beast had just commenced. Yet the brute of Florence was unsatisfied with mere murder. He harbored an affinity for dramatic flair. As if the sequence of heinous killings wasn't sufficient, this brute chose to intertwine an eerie twist within his lethal spree. With each existence he obliterated, he abandoned not merely a chilled corpse, but a sneering missive. A brutal, derisive challenge to the law enforcement, frantically striving to halt his reign of dread. These were not simply arbitrary scribbles. They were meticulously tailored, each one a grotesque fragment of the enigma, a somber clue along the path of the beast. And as a ghastly crowning touch, the assassin sent pieces of his victims, a morose testimony of his victories, horrendous proof of his audaciousness, the audaciousness of a man capable slaughtering, disfiguring, and then brazenly displaying his acts with such heartless disregard for human life. The jeers were a disconcerting supplement to an already horrifying case. They incorporated an additional degree of fear, a supplemental stratum of enigma. Who was this beast? What his desire to not only exterminate but to delight in it, to ridicule the very individuals attempting to thwart him? These queries tormented the consciousness of the detectives, the residents of Florence, and indeed anyone who stumbled upon this gruesome narrative. And yet, there was another element. An undercurrent of icy, premeditated cunning. The brute was not merely ridiculing the authorities. He was toying with them. It was a pursuit of predator and prey, only in this instance the prey was a merciless slayer. And the predator was the law enforcement, perpetually lagging, consistently just off the... It was a chase that held the entire city of Florence in its clutches. A chase that was nowhere near its conclusion. And as the death toll escalated, as the letters and body fragments continued to arrive, The icy reality began to permeate. The brute was more than a murderer. He was a performer, a puppeteer tugging at the threads, directing a concerto of dread that held an entire city prisoner. The beast, it appeared, was engaged in a malevolent game with the authorities, a game they were failing. The Monster of Florence's reign of terror eventually ceased, not with a grand finale, but with a soft sigh. The fear that had once paralyzed the city of Florence for a span exceeding a decade came to an abrupt end in the 1985. No longer were there lifeless couples uncovered within the woodland depths, no further menacing letters, no additional horrific mutilations. The horrifying chapter appeared to have found its final page. However, in the realm of genuine criminal study, matters are seldom so clear-cut. The ensuing legal proceedings were a tempest of allegations, admissions and denials. The limelight shone on Pietro Pacciani, a man with a history already tainted by aggression. Judged guilty in the year 2000, Pacciani became the embodiment of monster. However, his conviction failed to deliver the resolution that the city yearned for. Uncertainties lingered, murmurs of additional culprits persisted. Two such individuals were subsequently found guilty of the heinous acts, but the affirmation of culpability remained elusive. The court sessions morphed into a spectacle, brimming with dramatic pivots and shifts that could compete with any blockbuster thriller. Yet beneath the spectacle lay a harsh truth. 14 existences were ruthlessly snuffed out, their loved ones left to deal with the repercussions. Furthermore, the actual identity of the Monster of Florence stays in secrecy. Despite the verdicts, many speculate that the bona fide perpetrator remains at large, his atrocities credited to others. Hence, an uneasy quietude pervades the city. Of the slaughters may have ceased, but the wounds left in their wake are far from mended. The idyllic suburbs that once resounded with merriment and elation now murmur narratives of a beast that once stalked their lanes. The Monster of Florence may have vanished, but his ghost continues to haunt the city, a bone-chilling reminder of an era when dread reigned supreme.